Red light bled through the glass of the ambulance bay, pulsing against the polished floors like a heartbeat gone wild. The smell of antiseptic bit the back of his throat. "Dr. Rivera," someone shouted over the power. "Dr. Rivera to L&D 3 stat. Fetal Brady in transit. ETA 2 minutes." A nurse grabbed his sleeve and yanked. "We need you now." Javier broke into a run, shoes smacking the waxed corridor, white coat fanning behind him like a sail. The hospital hummed with late-shift electricity, clipped orders at the triage desk, the whir of an elevator, the metallic kiss of instrument trays. He caught the barest reflection of himself in a window, mask looped at his neck, hair shoved back, eyes that looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Vitals?" he asked as they rounded the corner. Mother initially normotensive, now 90, systolic and dropping. The nurse, Harper, was breathless, severe abdominal pain, vaginal bleeding en route. Paramedics say 2 pads saturated. Patient is termed by dates, no prenatal records in our system. She handed him a torn sheet from the EMS run report. Pen scrawl bled into the paper where rain had caught it. "Any comorbidities? Unknown," she says. She says she's fine. Harper rolled her eyes, grim affection for the stubborn. "Oh, and contractions every 2 minutes." The double doors swung open on a burst of cold air from the negative pressure anteroom. The delivery room's surgical lights were already warming. Bright discs of daylight drilled into the ceiling. 2 orderlies were pulling the bed skirts up. Anesthesia checked a laryngoscope with a click and a gleam. The fetal monitor trilled its anxious Morse. Javier pushed through the last knot of staff, gloving as he walked. "Hi, I'm Dr. Rivera. He stopped. For a split second, the sound dimmed, like someone turned the volume knob down on the universe. Every color sharpened. The woman on the bed, hair tangled with sweat, eyes glass clear despite the pain, turned her head at the sound of his voice. "Mara," he said, before the word could think of a way to hide inside him. Her pupils widened, a flare he knew better than his own pulse. Her lips parted. The contraction took her then, bowing her forward with a raw sound. "No, wait, Javier," she crumpled back, breath shredding. Her hand clawed at the rail until Harper wrapped fingers around it and squeezed, steady. He swallowed the reflex to step closer and tuck a stray curl behind her ear. He did not touch. He had not touched her in years. The sterile air was suddenly dirty with memory. Smoke from a winter street vendor where they'd eaten churros on a freezing night. The scent of her citrus shampoo on his pillow. Fetal heart at 90, dipping to the 80s. D-cells with contractions. "Okay," he said, and the word steadied him, found the track his mind knew how to run. Duty was a rail he could hold. "Let's get a blood pressure. I need a quick ultrasound." Type and cross, 4 units packed red, 2 FFP. Call Niku to come stand by. And page the on-call OB hospitalist for a second pair of hands. "I'm right here," said a woman at his elbow. "Dr. Cho." Mascara faintly smudged from the hour, but eyes precise. "You lead." Javier reached for the probe. Gel oozed cold over Mara's taut belly. The image flickered into being. The ghostly profile of a skull, the staccato flutter of a tiny heart, a thickened placenta edging the frame. He adjusted the gain, searching. "How far along?" he asked without looking. 40 weeks by LMP, Mara said. Her voice was hoarse, clipped with pain, but the edges of it were the same as the day she'd told him yes, in a park under a sky scribbled with contrails. No complications then, quieter. Eyes pinned to the ceiling tile dotted with pinprick constellations. Not until tonight. Another contraction climbed her and broke. Her fingers tightened on the bed rail until the joints blanched. He caught the shift of her abdomen under his hands, a subtle, board-like stiffness that did not melt between waves. "Bleeding's worsening," Harper said. "Pads changing to bright red, placental abruptions on the table," Javier said, heart dropping into gear. He glanced to anesthesia. "What's our line access? 218s, said the CRNA. "I can place a central if..." "No time," Dr. Cho said. Eyes on the strip as it dove. Heart rate 70, prolonged decel. Javier set down the probe. "We're going to the ore," he said to the room. And to Mara he softened the tone as much as the urgency allowed. We need to deliver the baby now. It's going to feel like everything all at once. You're safe with us." Mara's gaze skated over his face, catching on the place where his mask would soon hide his mouth. She looked like she might say something, like she was trying to choose between 10 sentences and a scream. "The," she whispered, a summoning and a warning, and then her eyes closed as another contraction raced through her. "Let's move," he said, and as they unlocked the bed and pushed, the monitor alarm leveled into a flat insistence that made his skin prickle. At the threshold of the ore anteroom, the overhead speaker cracked. Code Crimson L&D or 1. The doors swung wide, and the last thing he saw before the fluorescent brightness swallowed him whole was the gleam of the scalpel being unwrapped and beneath it the tremor in his own gloved hand. Scrub foam turned his skin to papery noise. He took the mask between fingers and looped it, the elastic thwacking the back of his head. He told himself the tiny tremor in his hands was caffeine burning off. He told himself it had nothing to do with the way Mara's name still felt like a bruise in his mouth. "Time of decision for emergency," Dr. Cho said, voice impersonal for the record. 2:09. The ore breathed cold blue. Surgical lights hung like planets. The anesthetic machine's soft beeps tapped a nervous metronome as the CRNA prepped for rapid sequence induction. An orderly adjusted the foot of the bed. Another tugged cords out from under the wheels. The air smelled metallic, slightly sweet with the promise of anesthesia gas. Mara clutched at the oxygen mask they'd placed over her face. Even through the haze of pain, her gaze tracked him, caught him. He felt it like a hand on his chest. "Doc Rivera," she said, between breaths that fogged the plastic. "If something happens, nothing's going to happen." He lied with such practiced gentleness, he almost believed himself. "Please," she managed, and the rest was written in the white weft of her knuckles as another contraction hit. "Fishar 60, called the nurse. It's not coming back up, knife," Javier said reflexively. And then, "No, not yet, consent." He forced himself to hear his own training. "Mara, we're going to put you to sleep because of the urgency. I need to say the words. Risks include bleeding, infection, possible hysterectomy if we can't control it, injury to nearby organs. I know it's fast. Do you understand?" Her eyes glossed, a nod toggled. He could see the calculus of someone with secrets, the boxes she'd stack in a fire. "Do it," she said, and let the crane tilt her head slide the laryngoscope. The endotracheal tube slipped past cords white and delicate as moth wings. Tape secured it. The ventilator took her breath with a soft mechanical kindness. "Prep and drape," Dr. Cho said. "Javier." He stepped to the left side of the abdomen as the chlorhexidine bloomed brown across her belly. Drapes rose like a sail, isolating the field to a clean rectangle of skin. He made the incision just above the pubic hairline, a swift phalanstele that parted skin and subcuticular fat. The room narrowed to the smell of cautery and the pull of retractors. He could have done the motions asleep. Cut, then bluntly dissected the fascia. Nick and extend, muscle separation. Peritoneum lifted and opened with a careful finger sweep. Javier's hands moved in an economy learned on nights like this. The last grip of the day holding the rope that pulled you toward morning. Inside the wall of protocol, his mind spun its own unapproved data. "You told me you didn't want kids, but we picked out names anyway. We said them to the ceiling in the dark like prayer." He remembered her hands flat on his chest counting beats when they used to play a game of how long can silence last before it turns to laughter. He remembered waking to an emptiness where she'd been and a single line in a note. "I have to go. I'm sorry, don't follow me." The Bakri balloon slid into place, and they inflated it until the uterus felt full, pressure tamping the open vessels. The bleeding slowed like a bad dream losing definition. "Transfusions here," a voice said, brisk. The cooler popped, bags thudded onto the stand. The first unit hung red and heavy. The rive purred, fibrinogens low. The lab reported minutes later through the intercom. 180's cryo, Dr. Cho said. "We'll need it." Javier finally looked up. Not at the warmer, Not toward the small bundle of life that had arrived, clawing at a world that had tried to let it go, but at Mara's face. Even taped and still, it was a map he could read with his eyes closed. The curve where a dimple would appear if she smiled. The small scar near her eyebrow, from the time she'd knocked into a cabinet while dancing in the kitchen. "Bring the baby by for a second if they're stable," he said, voice too careful. "Let the mother see before we transfer to NICU." The neonatologist nodded. The team wrapped the infant snug and wheeled the warmer closer. The tiny face, now pinking, turned reflexively toward the light. Dark hair plastered in a cautious curl. "Don't see yourself," he told himself. Ridiculous. Don't. He did anyway. He saw the precise notch in the ear that matched the one in his own. His neck went cold, as if someone had poured contrast dye down his spine. "Ready to transport NICU?" the neonatologist asked. "Yes," he said, but he didn't know if he meant the baby or himself. They wheeled the infant toward the door, the cry winding thinner with distance. Bleeding slowed further. Numbers on monitors grudgingly crept back into ranges that wouldn't make the nurses' mouths go flat. "Good," Dr. Cho murmured. "We might have threaded this needle." The anesthesiologist adjusted the dial. Vapor hissed. "We're stable." Barely. Javier placed one last suture on the uterine incision, hands steady now that they had something to hold. He was about to start closing fascia when a tremor shivered the OR table. Alarm screams went off all at once. The blood pressure plunging, the oxygen saturation dipping, the capnography hiccuping. "PVC's anesthesia," said sharply. "She's throwing them, bleeding." Dr. Cho's eyes snapped to the field. No expansion. "Where? Look at the leg," Harper said. "It's mottling." Is this an amniotic fluid embolism?" "It's CO2 just tanked," anesthesia said. "P starting compressions." The world tilted, then pitched. Javier's fingers locked on the edge of the drape to keep them from going dumb. "Mara," he said. And her name sounded like a plea you might make at a church door barred against a storm. "Compressions," Dr. Cho said, climbing onto a step to lean her weight through arms tense with purpose. The motion rocked the table, shook the blue curtain that hid their faces from each other. The monitor offered its straight-line contempt. "Epinephrine 1 milligram," anesthesia called, "already pushing. Turn up oxygen, stopping inhalational, going to 100%. Harper's gloved hands darted with a choreographer's economy, checking pulses, swabbing, drawing labs. Another nurse counted in a steady, unemotional voice. 1 and 2 and 3. A part of Javier stood outside himself and took notes. "Effort are rare. They come like lightning, blue thunder in a clear sky." Another part of him, the one that still had her laugh saved like a voicemail he could never quite bring himself to delete, raged at the unfairness of biology. 2 minutes, said the anesthesiologist. Check rhythm. Silence was its own sound. P persists. "Resume compressions," Dr. Cho said, sweat slipping at her hairline. "Javier, I'm here," he said. And he was. Right there at the incision, at the place where he'd put her back together if the body would let him. He swabbed away clean as the drape shifted with each push on her sternum. His hand went to the uterus, pressing, willing it to hold the balloon in place and not bleed out its life. The little portable radio in the corner, always tuned to whatever innocuous station housekeeping preferred, spilled out an absurdly cheerful chorus before someone snapped it off. The world shrank again to beeps and numbers and the slap of gloves on skin. Another epi, anesthesia said. "Bicarbonate, calcium, fibrinogen's back," a voice at the door said, carrying a tray. "Cryos thawed." "Hang it," Harper said. "She's cold." Warming blanket. Javier's mind tried to bolt for the past. He held it by the scruff. Focus, the suture in his hand felt like an anchor. He examined the uterine incision. No active bleeding. The Bakri balloon held. The uterus, dear God, the uterus. The place that had once only been an abstract in his lectures and then had turned into his profession's cathedral, was quiet inside the storm. 2 more minutes, Dr. Cho said. Check again. No pulse. The room like a held breath. P, anesthesia said. Compressions? He traded places with Dr. Cho. She slipped back to his side, and he leaned into the chest compressions, counting under his breath like a penance. He felt the sternum give, felt the body that he knew better than his own, and not at all. "Javier," Dr. Cho said, uncharacteristic softness calibrated to the molecules. "Look at me." He didn't. He couldn't. He pumped the chest and watched the monitor and thought about the night in the old apartment when she'd stood at the sink, bracing herself with both hands. The Countess chipped laminate digging into her hips and told him she couldn't marry him because she was leaving, and he had said nothing. No why. No stay. Because pride had been louder than the tiny, sensible voice that said, "People are finite and we do not get many of them." "Another epi," anesthesia said. Ultrasound at the bedside, cardiac activity. The screen showed a heart that didn't so much beat as twitch at the margin of motion, like a bird trapped behind glass. Again, Dr. Cho said. The door cracked and a NICU nurse slipped in, breathy with having run. "Update, baby is intubated but stable on CPAP. Blood sugar low, we bal loose dextrose. Neonatologist says probable mild hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. We're considering cooling protocol. They asked me to tell you." The information landed heavy into the bowl where all trauma sat to cool. Javier nodded once. Couldn't say thank you because there wasn't time. He pressed down for the count, heard his own voice steady and distant. 29, 30. "Stop," anesthesia said. "Check." A thin meander of electrical activity hesitated across the monitor, thought about letting them hope, then firmed into a rhythm that was not the flat line of defeat, nor the messy flutter of dying. Slowly, grudgingly, the numbers counted themselves into a heart rate. "We have a rhythm," anesthesia said, astonished and almost reverent. "Pulse?" Harper asked, fingers at the groin. "Yes." Relief cracked her voice like an egg. "Good," Dr. Cho said. She leaned in, stitched, strategized in the same breath. "Let's keep the pressors, continue blood products." "Javier, fascia." He moved as if someone had wound him back up, delineated each layer like a prayer bead. He could feel the flood of lactate leaving, replaced by the steadier waters of protocol. Somewhere on the far side of the drape, Mara drifted on a ventilated tide, body mediated by machines and the relentless kindness of a team built for nights like this. He palmed a sterile towel over the closed incision, taped dressing neat, and finally, let himself lean back. He had saved far sicker patients. He had also lost far healthier ones. He had never done chest compressions on the woman he had once promised to build a life with. "She's not out of the woods," Dr. Cho murmured as they stripped off gowns. "Ife can have biphasic components. ARDS, coagulopathy, heart failure. ICU will take her. We'll dangle the gods a deal and pretend it's science." He nodded. It was gallows humor, sure, but tonight it felt like the only spell he knew. The transport team rolled in with their equipment. Tubes were checked, lines numbered, drips read aloud, straps secured. The elevator ride to ICU was a fluorescent shaft through the hours. "You're not sure you'll get back." He walked alongside, holding a corner of the bed as if his hand on the metal might keep her from sliding off the earth. In the ICU, monitors flared to life. The night shift intensivist, Dr. Patel, shook their hands with sleep-blown eyes, then turned all business. "Vent settings, labs, Dick." "Trended," Harper said. "We're managing." Dr. Patel peered at the echo report the anesthesiologist had rushed through in the oar. "Right ventricle a little stunned. Pulmonary pressure's up. Okay, supportive, gentle. Watch for pulmonary edema. Keep an eye on fib." Javier stood at the foot of the bed as the team dispersed, feeling the hollow after-storm hush. Mara looked improbably small under the wires and warm blankets, the ventilator huffing with a steadiness that made him want to weep with gratitude and anger. Her hands lay open on the sheets, palms showing lines he had once traced, as if they formed a map to anywhere but here. Harper touched his arm, as if remembering how she'd grabbed him at the start, a bookend on the night. "NICU is down the hall." He nodded, throat dry. "I'll check." The NICU threw whole different light. Softer, purposeful galaxy of incubators like tiny spacecraft. A warm hum of machines. Nurses moved in a choreography of competence, only slightly gentled from the oar speed. He scrubbed his hands until they were raw and approached the radiant warmer, where the baby lay. The infant's chest rose with CPAP's small puffing insistence. Dark hair had dried into a stubborn cowlick. The little ear showed that knot. Javier stood there too long, staring, until the neonatologist, Dr. Ahmed, came up beside him. "Good response to resuscitation," Dr. Ahmed said, voice low. "Cord gases weren't as bad as I feared. We're cooling for neuroprotection and watching closely. You did well getting him out fast." "Him," Javier said. "The word catching. It's a boy." Dr. Ahmed glanced sideways, a doctor's curiosity edged with human instinct. "You know the mother?" Javier's breath slipped strangely in his chest. He arranged his face in a way that he hoped read as professional and not as drowning. "We used to," he said. It came out backwards but true. Dr. Ahmed nodded, not pressing. "Name for the chart." He looked at the baby, at the small hand curled into a fist like defiance. He should not be the one to say. He should not say anything. It was not his right nor his place. "Put infant of Mara Alvarez for now," he said. His voice lacked the steadiness, wore it like armor. "She'll tell you later." Back in the ICU, the night had deepened into the hour when staff talked a little softer, because the world outside was at its thinnest. Dr. Patel had a cup of black coffee, the heat haloing the rim. "We'll keep her sedated lightly," she said. "We need to see how her lungs behave, and her heart." Javier nodded, hearing only fragments. He set his palm on the bed's rail next to Mara's hand. He did not touch her skin. He told himself he didn't, because of infection control. He told himself a lot of things. "Javier," Dr. Cho had come in quietly. She held a clipboard. "Your name came up in her old records." He turned, a fresh line of adrenaline opening inside him. "What?" "When I pulled outside information through the high, there were fertility clinic records, years old. Initials on the consent forms were MA and JR. It could be coincidence. Or somebody else's JRI just." She looked at him with the kindness of a friend who knows what time it is inside your body. "Is there anything I should know for her care?" He stared at the clipboard as if it were a thin, combustible thing. The old ache, the one that started the morning he found the ring on the bathroom counter and a note, untwisted and slithered into his breathing. "She had a miscarriage," he said, mouth sand dry. "We did a round of IVF after. We had embryos frozen, and then she left. And you didn't." "No." He shook his head once quick, as if to dislodge the old arguments. "I didn't know what happened after." Dr. Cho's eyes moved to Mara, who lay still, ventilator whispering like a tide. "We don't have consent to dig through personal. But I thought, if this matters, for you or the baby." He stared so hard at the pulse ox trace that the green became a river he might fall into. He thought of the notch in the baby's ear, a silly bit of cartilage genetics, a coin toss that could land on either face, and yet here it was, head staring up at him like fate. He thought of the clinic's tiled floor and the pamphlets they'd thumbed, joking about names for theoretical children, as if future weren't a brittle thing. He did not notice at first that the ventilator had shifted tone, or that Dr. Patel had leaned hard into the view. Harper asked, already moving to the head to suction. Crackles. Pink froth. Dr. Patel's features sharpened. Pulmonary edema. Turn up, peep. Start no reflowdiuresis. See if she tolerates. The numbers tried to skitter away again. The rooms on this floor had a view of the city, and in some midnight windows Javier could see their mirror, flickering like ghosts. He thought about the baby 2 hallways away being cooled, his metabolism coaxed to slow time around his brain, a magician's trick against fate's saw. He stepped back as the team surged forward, and for the first time all night he had no immediate task under his hands. Mara's eyelids fluttered, a half-conscious throw from sedation and hypoxia. Her lips trembled beneath the tape. For a breath, a moment, her gaze slid up the long tunnel of consciousness and found him like a diver looking up at the last bright coin of air. He moved closer, as if the distance from the foot of the bed to the head had always been measured in years, and he might finally cross it. Her eyes were wet, either from irritation or from some last stubborn part of her will that refused the quiet. She mouthed around the endotracheal tube. He tried to read it. "I'm sorry," or "I'm okay," or "I'm yours." He leaned close. "Don't," he said, soft, and against everything he knew. "Don't worry, save it." Her fingernails moved against the sheet, dragging half-moons. "Javier," she mouthed, barely. And then her pupils rolled, the monitor rang out, and every hand in the room found a job again. By dawn, the hospital's polished hallways had traded the harshness of night for a strained pre-coffee quiet. The glass outside ICU caught a peach version of sunrise that barely reached the machine's steady glow. Mara had stabilized, relative only to sheer absence of catastrophe. The ventilator sighed, the pressers hummed. A body atop the sheets was pale enough to look like someone else's. Javier stood at the window between two worlds. On a rolling stool near the bed, a chart lay open to a scanned consent. Authorization for cryopreservation and use of embryos. Names redacted by the transfer, but initials visible at the corner, like the whisper of a signature. M.A. and J.R. He traced the loop of the J with his eyes until it became a river delta. He didn't touch the paper. Harper slipped in, an extra blanket folded over her arm. "Niku says the baby tolerated the first hours of cooling, vitals holding. They'll do another gas soon." "Thanks," he said. "Also," she added, "there's someone in the family lounge." He stiffened. "Who?" He said he's a friend. She made a small shrug. "He looks more terrified than territorial." In the lounge, the TV murmured a muted weather report. A man stood when Javier entered. Tall, mid-30s, curls compressed by an all-night baseball cap, eyes with the slack fear of the non-medical watching medicine happen. He wore a hoodie advertised by a local coffee roaster, and a hospital band on his wrist, permitted visitor. "I'm Nate," he said quickly. I came with Mara when the contractions started, but they took her. And then nobody could tell me anything aside from she's in surgery and then ECU, and then..." He broke his own flow. "Sorry. I'm probably the least helpful person in a crisis." "Are you her doctor?" Javier tasted the old bitterness of an answer he didn't know yet. "I'm one of them." Nate's hands crushed a paper cup until the lid buckled and splashed. He didn't notice. "She lives across the hall from me. We sort of adopted each other. No romance, I swear. I'm the guy that feeds her cat when she does night shifts. He waters my plants if I forget. When her labor started, she called me because she said she didn't want to be alone in a cab." He lifted a palm, pleading. "I don't know the father. She said it was complicated." Javier felt something in him give. A taut string's last ping before it snapped. He cleared his throat. "She's stable but critical. The baby is in NICU, doing as well as we can hope after all of it." Nate exhaled, a laugh that wasn't. "She's a tough one." "She always was," Javier said, before he could stop himself, and the man's eyes landed on him in a new way, like they had found another person in the room. "We knew each other," he added, because leaving it at that sounded less like a confession and more like triage. Nate's face flickered with a dozen unsaid questions, but he swallowed them. "Is there anything I can do?" "I'll let you know," Javier said, suddenly grateful for Nate's useless hands, his unstrategic care. "For now, sit, breathe." On his way back, he detoured to NICU because the gravitational pull was impossible to resist. The baby's warmer was surrounded by quiet efficiency, nurse adjusting lines, a respiratory therapist tweaking settings with a tenderness that unfolded from muscle memory. The name card still read "Infant of Mara Alvarez." "How is he?" Javier asked softly. The nurse, older, wise eyes behind a ridiculous headband of dancing cartoon penguins, tilted her head. "Stubborn, good sign." Javier's mouth twitched. The baby's hand had escaped the blanket and flexed. The ear notch. He had tried to ignore it. It refused to be ignored. "Do you want to?" The nurse began, then seemed to realize the stone border of professional boundaries. "I mean, I know you're the surgeon, not the well. Would you like me to put him in your chart? As a loud visitor?" Javier stared at the infant until his eyes watered. "I'm fine," he said, a lie that felt like a fence post hammered into loam. "Thank you." Harper met him in the ICU hallway with a stack of lab results and eyebrows doing their own triage. Fibrinogen up, platelets okay, lactate coming back down. "We're considering a SAT trial this afternoon if her lungs behave." He nodded. "Good." She nudged him with the edge of the folder. "Eat, Will. You won't," she said, and handed him a granola bar with the authority of someone who had hauled him through residency. "Pretend." He pretended. He thought about the consent form. He thought about the way Mara had taken the blow for them both, the night she left, and how he had let her, because anger is clean and grief is not. By mid-morning, Dr. Patel leaned over the bed, gentle. "Let's see what she can do." They dialed back sedation. The ventilator hiss changed pitch as it assisted less, asked more. Mara's lashes fluttered. Her fingers moved under the sheet, an invisible piano practice searching for an old tune. "Hey," Dr. Patel said with a smile that made lines fan from her eyes. "Mara, you're in the hospital. You had surgery. You and the baby are being very stubborn, which is what we like. Can you open your eyes?" They opened. Disoriented, drowning, then focusing like a ship finding a lighthouse. She fought the tube, gagging. Panic leapt like an old cat. "It's okay," Dr. Patel soothed. "We'll take it out if you follow my lead. Breathe with me. In, out." They extubated smoothly. The first breath on her own snagged. The second found more architecture. She coughed, winced. "Baby," the word flapped raw. "Alive," Dr. Patel said, the kindest truth first, in NICU cooling therapy. "Stable." Mara's eyes closed and opened again, adjusting. Her mouth was dry. How bad did I?" "Later," Dr. Patel said, not unkindly. "Save your strength." Mara's gaze slid, found Javier as if drawn by a magnet she had sworn to herself she would never believe in again. Her eyes filled in a way that made him have to look at the floor, so he could keep his face still. "Javier," she whispered. He nodded once, a doctor in a white coat, the exoskeleton for a man whose ribs felt like they had been rearranged. "Hi," he said, and the word carried too many miles. She stretched her hand toward him and stopped, as if the last inches were a chasm. "You were there." "I was," he said. A strange humor tugged her mouth. "Of course you were." Dr. Patel excused herself with clinical briskness that was also a benediction. Harper adjusted the pillow, gave Mara a sip of water, checked numbers, then disappeared with the light step exit of someone trained to keep privacy intact. Silence wedged into the angles of the bed. "You could have called," he said, and hated himself for saying it, for being small when everything asked him to be wide. She looked at the ceiling. A tear slid into her hairline. "I tried once. I hung up." Why? Her throat moved. The rive line twitched with her tiny shift, because the only way through was to be the villain. "If I told you, if we argued, we would have found a way to be together, and I couldn't. I couldn't be the reason you lost the life you were making." She swallowed. "You deserved a different kind of pain than watching me go sick." He stood very still, because if he moved, he might break something. "Sick," he said. The word dropped like a pebble, made ripples he could already see turn into waves. "I had lymphoma," she said, so flat he almost didn't hear it. "Stage 2. They found it when I went for a scan after the miscarriage, because my OB was being thorough. I walked around for 2 weeks with ports in my chest and a ring on my finger. And then I realized I couldn't do both. Not the wedding, not the chemo, not the way you look when you're trying to be brave for someone you love." She closed her eyes. "We froze embryos first. Insurance would only cover it if we did it right then. I told myself that if I lived, I would figure out the rest." The room went so quiet he could hear his own pulse in his ears. "I didn't want you to choose me and then watch me disappear," she said to the ceiling, because she couldn't say it at him. "I thought maybe if I left first you'd hate me, and then you wouldn't have to grieve me. It was the only mathematics I could bear." He had to sit down, the floor rising toward his knees like a tide. He found the visitor chair, its vinyl sighing. His palms were slick. He tasted iron. "How long?" 5 years, she said. Remission for 3, her mouth wobbled. I was going to call. I wrote emails I never sent. I took the ring out sometimes and held it in my hand and thought I'd grown up enough for the truth. She looked at him then directly. When I decided to use one of the embryos, I told myself it wasn't about you, that it was about me wanting a baby before my ovaries forgot, that you'd moved on, and this was my life to hold. He covered his face with his hands, pressed hard until stars sparked. Are you telling me? I don't know if he'll be okay, she said first, because that mattered more. But yes, he's yours, ours. She let the words sit raw. I signed the consent. I know it was selfish. I know I should have called. I wanted to meet the version of you who wasn't mine and see if I could be brave enough to find you anyway. He lowered his hands. The world had become very sharp-edged and also suddenly soft. He laughed, a small, bewildered bark that turned into something like a sob. The notch in his ear, he said stupidly, because this was what his brain could grab. She smiled like the most fragile thing in the room was humor. You and your family and that ridiculous notch. He stood, then hesitated, then put his hand on the rail, and this time let his fingers drift further until they touched the back of her hand. Her skin was warm, drier than usual, the tiny slip-in bite of the hospital soap in it. She flinched, then didn't pull away. I would have chosen you, he said, rough. Every time I know, she whispered. That's why I made sure you couldn't. Pressers beeped. The monitor wrote green cursive that spelled breathe, breathe, breathe. The door cracked and Dr. Patel stuck her head in. Sorry to interrupt. Niku called. The baby's labs look good. They think the cooling is doing what it should. Mara's face crumpled. She covered her eyes with her free hand and sobbed once in a thin, relief-torn line. After a while, when the room had reassembled, she said, I named him. In my head, I didn't put it on paper. I thought it would jinx everything. It's stupid. Nothing is stupid. He said with the specific authority of a doctor telling a patient the truth they can hold. Tell me. She blushed, a miracle. Sol, son, he said. The first thing he had ever bought her was a cheap planetarium kit that had glowed weakly in their living room. Of course, Harper slipped back in, eyes bright like she'd definitely pretended she didn't hover outside to hear what she needed to know. Ready to see him? She asked. Mara nodded so hard the ventilator tubing that had been snaked around the bed tugged at the pole like a dog on a leash. They coordinated with Niku to bring Sol's warmer by for a minute. The route was planned like a presidential motorcade, doors held, elevators secured, corridor cleared. When the warmer glided in, trailing a comet tail of cautious staff, the ICU lights seemed to re-aim at a different center. The baby's face was still and small under the hat. His chest rose and fell. His skin, no longer blue, glowed with the damp sheen of being very much alive. Mara lifted a trembling hand and touched the edge of the blanket. Hey, Sol, she whispered, voice cracking on the name like ice. Hey, my bright boy. Javier stood an inch to the side and a mile away, the rope bridge between rolls swaying. Do you want? The nurse began. Yes, Mara said, and then softer to him. If you want. He looked at her. He looked at the baby. He washed his hands with the ridiculous devoutness of saints. He slid one finger under the blanket and let Sol's fist close around the top joint. The grip was nothing, and it was everything. The notch in the ear sat there like a signature on a document. No one read aloud, but everyone obeyed. I'm sorry, Mara said in a rush then, as if the sight of the thing she loved made every apology she'd held dissolve. For leaving, for not calling, for making you find out like this. I'm angry, he said simply. And I'm glad you're alive. I can hold both. She nodded, tears again. Okay. Harper squeezed his shoulder. A patient's labor whisper slid under it. Breathe, Dad. He didn't correct the word because the correction felt like pretending the floor wasn't where it had been all along. After Niku wheeled Sol back to his starship. After the paperwork made a small, bureaucratic clatter that sounded like a future being built one tab at a time. Dr. Patel made her rounds through a crowd of tubes that looked less ominous than they had at midnight. Keep the oxygen. We'll watch for any delayed issues. Mr. Rivera? She stumbled at the title because she was used to calling him Javier. You should sleep. I will, he said out of habit. He did not. When the sun cleared the office towers and threw rectangles of polite gold on the ICU floor, he was standing at the foot of Mara's bed, looking exactly like every cautionary tale in the physician wellness brochure when the monitor gave a short, nasty bark. PVC's, Harper said, already at the head. Here we go again. Dr. Patel moved quick. Ultrasound. The echo at the bedside showed a heart that had worked through a war and was tired of its own bravery. Fluid shimmered around the right ventricle where there shouldn't be any yet. Pericardial effusion, Dr. Patel said, mouth flat. Small. Keep an eye. Javier's hands went cold and then hot, a wave he had no surfboard for. He saw the needle, saw the subseaphoid approach. He felt the room tilt toward another emergency. Mara's eyes opened wide. Not again, her expression said, not again. Let's not borrow trouble, Dr. Patel murmured, scanning angles, measuring. It's small. It might resolve with time. No tamponade. The monitors kept their heartbeat patter. The room slowly exhaled. Javier sank into the chair and let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd locked in his chest. He had thought this was going to be the day he told her off, or forgave her, or both. Instead, it was the day the hospital taught him again how holy it is to keep someone you love alive. Come closer, Mara croaked. He did. She looked at him a long time as if sketching his face anew. I left to spare you, she said. I chose you by choosing to be the bad thing that happened. He put his forehead on the back of her hand, and the angle felt like praying because he didn't know how to do it any other way. I know, he said finally. I know now. Night again, which felt like a loop someone kept unspooling to test the tensile strength of their hearts. The ICU lights had dimmed to mimic a proper circadian rhythm. The machines disregarded it and kept their own hours. Mara dozed in a sedative-softened, pain-managed flow. Her hands made small movements in sleep, as if sewing. Javier sat with a legal pad he'd stolen from a nurse's station. Not because he had anything to write that could be better than promises, but because the act of holding a pen sometimes tricked his body into thinking it could control outcomes. In the corridor, he could hear the soft argument between a resident and a night pharmacist about a dose that had to be precise and a chart that was not. He thought about precise and imprecise hearts. He thought about consent, the way it had seemed like homework until he learned it was love. When Mara woke again, it was with a clarity that startled him. "How's Sol?" she asked, voice stronger. "Stubborn," he said, and her smile made the Romy pole look like a menorah, like a place one keeps light. Cooling ends in 12 hours. They'll warm him slowly. If EG is reassuring, they'll move him to a step-down nursery. She breathed a longer inhale than any she'd had earlier. Can I? Tomorrow, he said. We'll make it happen. She looked at his hand. You haven't left. I did, he said. I went to Niku, he hesitated. And the chapel, she slid her gaze up. What did you say there? He let out a small, embarrassed laugh. I said I was an idiot. And that if some statistically improbable arrangement of particles had given me a second chance, I would like to not waste it being self-righteous. Her eyes softened. You were never self-righteous. I was proud, he said, and you were sick, and we were very young for how old we thought we were. We still are, she said. I am literally full of balloons. She gestured weakly toward the bakery, toward the plastic things keeping her blood shaped like a life. They sat for a time. He told her about the time he'd tried to make paella without a plan, and the smoke alarm had performed a concerto, and how his neighbor's toddler had learned his name the way children do, by shouting it from a balcony. She told him about Nate and the cat named Embolus, who had chosen her because hospitals attracted strays that knew when a person needed a bossy animal. He didn't ask the question that the whole building had been hanging over him like mist. Why didn't you tell me before you used the embryo? She answered it anyway. I wanted to be someone who didn't need you, she said to the ceiling. I wanted to be a person who chose, he nodded. He wasn't going to punish her for a calculus that kept her alive. I'm here now, he said, useless and true. She turned her head, swallowed. Do you want to be? He could have said 1,000 clever things. He could have made a joke about the notch in a tiny ear. He could have said he had charts, schedules, rounds, the endless call, a life heavy with other people's deliverances. He didn't. Yes, he said. Then, because his honesty had finally found its rhythm, he added, even if you don't want me to be. She studied him, face open, worry and gratitude in equal strands. I do. Something uncoiled low and deep, an animal that had been sleeping with one eye open for years. He put the legal pad down. He reached for her hand. She met him halfway, between gown and sheet and the wires that made her a radio transmitting from the edge. The night nurse, an angel with blunt-cut bangs and the calm to carry a building, smiled when she came in for vitals and found them like that. Do you want to do skin-to-skin in Niku tomorrow? She asked matter-of-factly. Yes, I'd arrange mother-baby contact with all the lines. It looks like chaos. It's actually magic. Mara's eyes filled. Yes, and you? The nurse asked Javier, with an unbothered authority that didn't leave room for old grievances. Fathers do very well at kangaroo care, statistically. He blinked. The word father bounced off his skull and came back soft instead of hard. If he's allowed to be out that long, yeah. Let me be bossy for 2 minutes, the nurse said, writing notes in the arcane code of nurses, who are the only ones who know where the real power is. Call HR tomorrow. Your hospital has paternity leave, even for attendings who think they're special and don't need it. He laughed, sheepish. Yes, ma'am. When morning came, the sky was a different sponsorship of blue, and the city had rearranged itself to look like possibility again. They wheeled Mara, monitors and Isai, and the impish dignity of a person in a backless gown down the corridor. The Niku doors opened with a whisper. Sol's warmer had been replaced with an incubator now that cooling was ending. The nurse opened the little portholes like a submarine and did the complicated dance of lines and tiny bodies. They placed Sol against Mara's chest, his face a question mark until it found the old answer of heartbeat and skin. His mouth moved, rooting even in sleep. He made a small, contented sound that seemed to lift dust motes into orbit. Javier watched the color climb in his face. Mara watched the life she had built from 1,000 impossible choices add itself up to this sum. The monitor above wrote its small poetry of numbers. Do you want? The nurse asked, and this time it was to Javier with full ceremony. We can switch. The impossible length of his eyelashes threatened to embarrass Javier in the face of pure, ridiculous beauty. He cried then, silent and mortifying and inevitable. Mara reached across the chasm of their merged, complicated lives and touched his forearm. "The notch," he said, because he had to, because he used to fill intimacy with trivia when feelings were too much. "He's going to think we're all marked like pirates." "We are," she said. "By life, they spent an hour like that." Then two nurses drifted in and out. Dr. Ahmed came by, briskly pleased. E.G. had the graceless grace of normalcy. The rewarming went smoothly. The city turned another notch in its day. In a quiet moment, Nate stuck his head in with a bouquet of flowers so ugly it wrapped back around to charming. Carnations the color of enthusiastic nail polish, a spray of something that smelled like optimism. He saw Javier with the baby, and Mara with the wires, and his face did a slow math that ended with a grin. "I'm going to Target," he announced, "because none of us has real clothes, and also because I feel wildly useful when purchasing snack foods in bulk." "Get the good pudding," Mara said. "The good pudding," he repeated solemnly and vanished. Afternoon slid toward whatever came after. Paperwork was signed. Names were put where names go. Javier stood in the hospital's basement parking garage, making a phone call he had rehearsed in his head a dozen times. To his mother, to say that certain dreams she had folded away could be unfolded if she wanted. When he came back upstairs, Mara was asleep, Sol in a clear box with stars stuck on the side by a nurse who did that for all the babies, and not just the ones belonging to obstetricians with too much gravitas. Harper leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. "You okay?" she asked. "No," he said, smiling, because the word had stopped being tragic. "But I will be," she smirked. "We're going to talk about your boundary crossing at some point." "Absolutely," he said. "I'll schedule a mea culpa with risk management and bring muffins." "You'll bring muffins anyway," she said. "It's your love language." He looked at the two bodies in the room that made the rest of the building irrelevant. It is now. Evening again. The ICU was calmer. Mara had been stepped down from certain drip. Dr. Patel signed off on a move to the intermediate care maternity unit in the morning, if the night behaved. In the dim, under the rasp of hospital air, they lay side by side in a way that wasn't, sharing the not quite dark. "Will you come over when we're home?" Mara asked into the space between the beep of one monitor and the hush of another. "Even if it's just to hold him while I shower. Or to yell at the cat who insists the bassinet is a spaceship designed exclusively for him." "Yes," he said immediately. And after that, he pushed his chair closer until its wheels squeaked and he didn't care. "After that, we'll go very slow. We'll remember how to talk without dodging. We'll see a therapist. We'll keep Sol alive and fed and adored. We'll tell him the truth when he's old enough, that love is messy and heroic, and sometimes dumb and sometimes brave, and that we chose him as much as he chose us." She smiled, eyes gone soft in a way that made the ICU look like a chapel again. "And if we break each other again, then we'll fix what we can and apologize for the rest," he said. "But we won't disappear like ghosts. We will not be polite to our own fear." She reached for his hand. He reached back, their fingers braided, careful around the tape at her wrist. "Javier," she said. Thank you for delivering our son," he swallowed. "Thank you for surviving." There were no trumpets, no swelling score. A janitor's cart squeaked in the hall. Somewhere, an elevator dinged with the world's most underwhelming triumph. On the monitor, the green line went up and down with the ancient, boring miracle of a heart that refused to stop. The nurse tucked a blanket around Mara's shoulders. The incubator glowed like a small moon. In it, Sol made that tiny, startled face babies make when their dreams switch scenes. The notch in his ear caught the light. Javier closed his eyes and pictured a map that had once been shredded, and now, with tape and patience, might be turned into a path again. He pictured a future he hadn't let himself touch because it looked like a ruin. It was not ruined. It was a construction site, noisy and full of risk, and people with bad coffee and hard hats telling jokes at 3 a.m, because someone had to. He opened his eyes. The room hadn't changed, and also it had. He wasn't proud enough anymore to pretend not to notice. Mara exhaled, a long breath that sounded like a person climbing onto a shore. "Hey," she said, eyes half-lidded, voice down to a thread. "Yeah, what if we named him Sol Javier Alvarez Rivera?" She asked, daring the space with the kind of courage that comes after you have lived. He laughed, quiet and unspooled, 19 different hurts pooling into one uncomplicated yes. "We'll need a very long birth certificate," he said. But okay, they watched their sons sleep. The night hummed. The beeps continued their tireless work. Nurses charted. Someone laughed in the hall. The surgical lights 2 floors down were being cleaned for tomorrow's emergencies, which would arrive like weather. In the morning, everything would begin and begin again. For now, his gloved hands were still empty and not tremoring. For now, duty and love were the same muscle, tired and strong. Outside, dawn bent its red light against the glass, not warning this time, but a blush. Inside, a doctor and the woman he had lost and found again sat in the bright, relentless now, and didn't look away.